Now for our next keynote session. We're talking generative AI 2 years on. My guest is Neha Khan, partner at Quantum Black AI by McKinsey. We are talking Gen AI 2 years on. Hi Neha, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Good to speak to you again. And I don't know about you, but I remember a couple of years ago, the moment when someone came literally sprinting into a meeting I was in with many other people to show us their first experience of ChatGPT or whatever the model was they were playing around with. It was literally like the moon landings moment, the Kennedy assassination moment, if you're of that age. Where were you when you first saw this or whatever? So I'm sure your presentation is far more in depth than my short story there, but I'll hand the virtual floor to you because we've come a long way in a couple of years. Over to you, sir.
We have indeed. Fantastic. Okay, I always love starting my talks with this. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And it feels a little bit like we're in a magical time. AI is everywhere. It's part of our daily lives. It's helping us decide what to watch, what to listen to, what to buy, and in some cases also who to vote for. Now, some of the headlines that we've seen from an AI point of view have been absolutely amazing. Being able to detect cancers, as an example, accelerating drug discovery. One of my favorites is being able to explore the stars and the universe. But to the point of this talk, 2023, a different type of AI captivated all of our imagination. And some of the headlines have been even more amazing. Claims that ChatGPT has an IQ of 155. That puts it in the top 0.01 percentile of test takers. It's written books, it's won awards, it's even passed exams. And not just any type of exams, the bar exam as an example. That made a bunch of my legal colleagues really sit up and pay attention what's going on here. It's also done some things which are probably not so inspirational around deep fakes. And it's also made up a lot of things too. So much so that the word of 2023 was hallucinate. But we'll come on to that. Now, always is great to look at from a visual point of view of how is this technology evolving. And this was the best that generative AI/AI could do back in March 2023. Fast forward 11 months. This is what Sora was able to do from a generative AI point of view. This is what OpenAI debuted. Sora is still not available yet, but to be able to type in some text and generate video, about 2-3 minutes of video, has absolutely blown everyone away. And recently, in the last 48, 72 hours, Meta also demonstrated some of their capabilities that they're going to release at some point. And if anything, that pace of innovation is just going to continue to accelerate. It all started with a paper that Google wrote back in 2017 and has accelerated tremendously last year and also continue to accelerate this year. And if anything, we expect that pace of innovation to continue. And this grows across all different types of models, whether it's models to do text, image, video, audio, or even multimodal, whether they're large language models, small language models, whether they're closed source or open source or something in between. In fact, just before I joined this call, I was looking on huggingface.com, which is a repository of a lot of open source models. And there's over 1,030,000 models available. So the takeaway I want you to take away from this is that the technology is getting better and better. That's a good thing, but it's also a tricky thing for many organizations. But we'll cover this. Now, some of those capabilities have really started to reach human performance level. And so if we look at that human benchmark across the top, when it comes to handwriting, speech, image, reading, language, maths recently, code getting there. But we're getting to a point now where these models are better than humans in many, many cases, of course, with the benchmark point of view. And recent breakthroughs, for example, OpenAI's O1 model has really, really caught a lot of people off guard, especially passing competition maths, code completion, and PhD level science questions. It's now got to that level where people are now really paying really close attention to it. How fast is this technology accelerating, getting better and better? Now, from a business point of view, it's been 2 years. And the questions that business leaders have been asking have started to change. Back in 2023 is, what is it? Like, what is it not? How does it relate to traditional AI and the traditional AI type investments? Is it hype or is it reality? Now the questions are much more pragmatic and forward looking, especially around value. How can I actually see the value from this particular technology? We know it's disruptive. We know it has potential, but how can I actually see the value? How do we organize and govern ourselves to move fast? How do we balance risk and value creation? what are the tech and talent implications for this? Now, from our research as Quantum Black and McKinsey, we believe that AI as a general can unlock anywhere up to 26 trillion in total value. Generative AI is a piece of that puzzle. And if I double click into generative AI, that's anywhere up to 4.4 trillion that can be unlocked in terms of productivity. And that goes across 4 different areas, whether that's marketing and sales, software engineering, customer operations, product and R&D. That could account for anywhere up to 75% of the bulk of where productivity could be gained. And that's anywhere up to 60 to 70% of the tasks that we do today. The tasks that we do today could be actually automated away by this technology. Now, this goes across all different types of industries, from high-tech, retail, banking on one end of the spectrum, all the way to insurance and agriculture on the other end of the spectrum. And so like most of the value really comes from 4 general types of implementation. And I'm going to call it kind of implementation use cases. They're the co-pilots. These are those type of chatbots that you see. And there's lots and lots of chatbots. And everyone is doing this right now. So that's number 1. And this is not just about search. I want to be very clear. This is about interacting with a co-pilot, synthesizing, extracting insights, and accessing your data and knowledge like you've never been able to do before. So there's lots of activity around the co-pilots. On customer engagement, there's a tremendous amount of activity and potential here. Many organizations are using it for hyper-personalization, not just traditional. And let me try and explain this. Rather than everyone all your customers getting the same message, or rather than segmenting customers into different age groups or different types of categories and sending messages to those categories, it's actually doing an individual one-for-one basis, really hyper-personalization. So on customer engagement, there is a tremendous amount of potential here. And many organizations are doubling down on this. When it comes to creative content across whether it's text, video, audio, those different types of modalities, but also whether it's actually doing RFPs or contracts or generating anything that has a generation complex, this is the heart of what generative AI can do. And there's lots of organizations who are following this. And then finally, from a software engineering coding point of view, imagine giving your developers superpowers. Imagine taking a normal developer and making them a 10x developer, or taking a 10x developer and making them a 100x developer. There are tremendous amounts of value and use cases that many people are using right now, this technology, to accelerate productivity. Now, here's where I get to the bulk of this talk. If we all agree there are many opportunities, here's where it actually gets really, really sour. That only 11% of organizations, and this is from our research, and we put this onto our website, 11% of organizations really are seeing the value and actually putting this stuff into production. And there are many, many things that hold back, whether it's mindset, whether it's alignment, capabilities, whether it's risk, whether it's trust in these systems, or even the data. There are lots of things. So I'd love to just spend the next few minutes just giving you a framework, a very simple framework, how you can think about rewiring your organization. But I'm doing that from a lens of what are leaders doing? That 11% who are succeeding with this technology, who are actually seeing the value from this technology, what are they doing differently? And it all starts with a strategy, a North Star. What's the goal? And we're going to dive into each one of these buckets. Then it's the capabilities, where it's ways of working, whether it's the tech itself, data. We're going to talk a little bit about talent implications. And then finally, how do you be responsible with this? So I'm going to spend the next few minutes just diving into each one of these little buckets, just to orientate you on what are leaders doing and maybe what you should be thinking about in your organization, just so you start seeing the value of this particular technology. So if I talk about technology, strategy, lots of organizations, they make lots of bets across the organization, very ad hoc type use cases, pilots, but pilots don't really scale. That's one. Two, it doesn't really transform those organizations. And they miss this really key opportunity to unlock synergies between the tech, between the data, between, I'd even argue, stakeholders. What leaders are doing, they're actually focusing on a domain by domain across the organization. So picking an area, maybe it's marketing, maybe it's sales, maybe it's something in ops or maybe even back office, but picking a domain and saying, what are the use cases we need to do in a domain? And then going after each one of those use cases with this particular technology to transform the domain. Now, what that also does, it unlocks synergies, because I'd argue there are links between the technology, the data, and the stakeholders. So you actually end up going faster and faster as you start to roll things out and start to transform the way that the organization works. That's one of the key things from a strategy point of view. The next is around adoption. And this is around ways of working. many organizations are treating this as a technology, tech first mindset. Here's a tool and users go use it. But the problem is users don't use it. It just end up getting rejected. Now this gets compounded even further because behind the scenes, there are various different departments not working together, working in silos, whether it's risk, whether it's AI, cloud, data, vendors. They're all working in different silos and the users are on the outside. Is there a better way? Now, I will borrow something from Steve Jobs. You've got to start from the customer experience and then work your way back towards the technology. Bring the users in. Who are your users for this particular technology? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Do you actually even need AI or Gen AI to solve it? And then figuring out what's the product you're building and is that really solving a problem? Let the users champion the solution. Bring them into it. So let them co-create so they can champion it. Far more adoption this way. So that's on one ways of working. When I talk about tech, we already talked about these domain use cases at the top, like having a focus. And then you have a choice. Do you buy or do you build? And if you build, do you use open source or closed source or something in between? And then you need to think about all these other constraints within inside your organization: security, scalability, performance, ops. What does day two look like if I need to support this thing? How do I keep pace? Remember I said the technology is changing at a ridiculous pace. So how do I keep pace and keep up with the technology changes? Many organizations that are actually using this effectively have started to move to a platform play. Really, really, really trying to actually put a platform in place so that they can swap pieces in and out as the technology changes. So what's state of the art today is not state of the art tomorrow, but they can replace those and focusing on that modularity. So that's from a technology point of view. There's something to think about. Many organizations get bitten by this. Now, when it comes to data, I can do a whole topic on data. And I'll preface this. Data is the elephant in the room for many, many use cases, especially, remember, and this is the key point to think about. Large language models, and if I talk about the text ones, they're language models, not knowledge models. Your knowledge is inside your organization. And for many use cases, it's locked away. And for many use cases, actually trying to find out where the data is just time wasted. Then it's also managing the data. Now, I'm not here to advocate what type of data platform you use, whether you use a data lake, a data mesh, a data fabric, data virtualization. You need something to put stuff together. But I would argue for this is make your data findable, make it accessible, and make sure the quality is good. If anything, this technology, when you start to put it onto bad quality data, it will highlight very quickly how bad your data is. And so you will need to pay attention to this. It will make things very, very transparent very, very quickly. Now, when it comes to talent, I'm also going to borrow a quote from Steve Jobs. Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. And so it's not just about technical talent. And I want to really drum this down. It's not about technical talent. It's also about non-technical talent. Subject matter experts, especially those that understand those domains, those that understand the business questions. What are you trying to solve? You need to bring them into the process. But you also need to balance the infosec, risk, compliance, legal, all together as that football team of different types of skills and profiles together to try to solve these problems and also transform your organization. Now, there's another part of this. It's also about adoption. And so that also requires upskilling and reskilling of your current workforce. It's no point putting a tool out there or putting a bunch of tools out there that no one wants to use. And even if you bring them in to co-create, you've also got to think about behaviors and mindsets. So there needs to be some kind of upskilling and reskilling that needs to happen in your organization. Now, that also finally leads me on to responsibility. And this is really what leaders are focusing on. And I think Stephen Hawkins talks about it really nicely here. AI could either be the best or worst thing to happen to humanity. There are many risks with this particular technology, whether it's on copyright, whether it's privacy, security, bias, discrimination, and harm. And these things are not conceptual. They are happening. They are really happening. So the questions that you need to ask from an organizational point of view is, what's the policies? What's the practices? What's the tools you've got to mitigate it and manage this? What are your ethical principles? How are you adhering to a lot of the regulatory changes that are going on around us? What's the stuff that you put in place for governance around managing this technology, not just the data, but also how it's being used? Basically, what's your responsible AI stance? And this is about shifting left on this. Now, I'm going to close this down and just summarize. And I've whizzed through this a lot, but I think it's an important topic. Just to give you a flavor of what's happening, there is a huge amount of value here. AI is accelerating a ridiculous pace of a technology that can really impact society, but also impact the way that we work. And it's done at a pace that we haven't seen before. Now, there are many companies that are gaining competitive advantage already, but there are many companies that are not gaining competitive advantage, are really struggling with it. I said only 11% are actually putting this into production and seeing value. Now, I've given you that many opportunities for productivity, whether it's the Copilot, these chatbots, customer engagement in terms of real hyper-personalization, content generation across many different types of modalities, but really to make things easier and giving people superpowers, and also coding and software, accelerating developers, giving them superpowers, making a normal developer a 10x developer. But all that said and done, the risks are real and they need to be mitigated. So this is the whole thing about shifting left on risk. And then I gave you a bit of a framework of how to get going in terms of what's the North Star for your organization and how should you be focusing on that? Not point by point little proof of concepts, but how do you transform your organization domain by domain? Then it's the capabilities that you'll need from ways of working, bring the customer in, the customer experience, focus on that, and then technology will take care of itself. The tech itself, and how do you build for modularity, because it's improving at a pace that we haven't seen before. The data, which is the elephant in the room in many use cases, and so how do you focus on quality and bringing that to the surface? And the talent, how do you think about upskilling and reskilling? But what about the other types of talent you need to make this work? And then finally, on your responsible AI principles, what are they and have you defined them and how are you embedding that in your organization? So I'll wrap up here with a question. What will you do next? Not next month, not next year, but tomorrow. My name is Naya. I'm a partner at Quantum Black. Thank you for your time. And maybe we have some time for Q&A.
There's always time for Q&A with you, sir, always. Key question for me there really is you're talking about the speed of that acceleration. For organisations that aren't fully up to speed, who aren't quite where they feel they need to be, that can be intimidating. Everyone else feels like they're ahead of you. You're missing out. It's the FOMO situation. What advice would you have for them to actually start getting a foothold in this AI arms race, if you like, to make sure they are suitably kitted up and fit for the future? What would your advice be to them?
Yeah, and look, there's two ways of looking. There's a bottom-up approach with inside the organization, and there's a top-down from a board C-suite point of view. This to me is a board C-suite point of view. And the similarity I'd give it to is like the internet. When the internet came along, or even mobile, when mobile came along, a lot of organizations didn't see how much disruptive of the technology the internet was, or even mobile was. And when they did realize many, many years later, it was too difficult for them to catch up. And there's been many winners and there's also been many losers. I'd use that as an example to say, look, here's a technology that can really, really disrupt. It should be a C-suite question. It should be a board question. It should be what are we doing? Should we look into it? What could it potentially disrupt for ourselves? And then the next part of that is, what are our competitors doing? So it's not just about fear of missing out, but it's also, what if we don't do this, but our competitors do this? I'd ask it that way.
That's a good way to look at it. Absolutely. And the second question I'd ask is a common bit of advice is, look for quick wins, look for pilot projects, look for things that you can start to see benefit from. There's always the concern about dipping into this area as almost a vanity project, to say you have. How do you go about picking the right projects to test, to trial, to infuse with Gen AI? How do you select the right ones to give you the most impact?
Yeah, and again, this comes back to the North Star kind of way of thinking about this is, what is the goal here? What is the North Star here for the organization? And what's the kind of transformation that you want to see from this? If it's these ad hoc type, yes, in one respect, you can do very small pilots to quickly learn. And I'd argue just from a learning point of view, what's it going to take to embed this? What's it going to take to actually get going with this? But there's another flip side of this is, what's the transformational effect that you want? What's the ROI? If I do this, what am I changing and how do I measure that? Many organizations don't think about ROI. They don't think about, how am I going to measure this? How am I going to think about adoption? What does that really mean? Is that EBITDA impact that I'm looking for this? Or is it performance impact internally? And if so, what does that look like? So again, I'll come back to what I said earlier, my first point. This is a C-suite question about transformation for an organization. If you look at it purely on a technical point, it's not going to transform and it's not going to deliver you the results.
That's absolutely the way to look at it. Well, Naya, thank you so much for joining us again. You're always a fantastic storyteller. The way you break it down with such clarity is always an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you for your time. Thank you all.
Absolutely. A pleasure. Take care. Thank you. Right.